Here's our Buoy 10 report for August 13th. Clearly today, I didn't fish. However, did make a few phone calls and listen to what the fleet had to say, and it sounds like it was very similar to what we saw yesterday. The bite happened first thing in the morning, then after that, guys had to really search, and it was a bit of a grind. So what I'm gonna do right now is kind of talk about a few points that people should keep in mind while they're down there in Astoria, especially when it's busy, like it sounded like it was today. It sounded as though boats were really cramped into tight spaces, rod tip to rod tip, and the best thing that you can do is get away from those crowds, especially if you're just trying to grind it out. Now, if half the boats are hooked up, yep, of course, dive in there and get rod tip to rod tip. However, if you just see one net here, one net there, get out of there. There's no sense of being there. You're talking about thousands of lines in the water trying to catch maybe 15, 20 fish. Go off, find a different spot, a different channel, a different depth contour, fish by yourself. It's a numbers game. The more fish that you personally get in front of, the more fish that you're gonna catch. So if you're out there competing for the same small number of fish along one certain troll, your success rate will go down. Another thing to keep in mind, I've been getting a lot of questions about troll speed. You know, typically I try and keep my speed over ground under 3.5, 4 miles an hour on my GPS speed. But when you have currents, especially that what we're going to see here later on this week, that are well over 3-4 miles an hour, sometimes the boat is in neutral, sometimes it's in reverse. But here's the one thing to keep in mind. Just pay attention to your line angle. If you remember back in high school when we did geometry, the Pythagorean theorem, it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, what does that mean for us? Well, if we have 50 feet of line out, and it's straight up and down, then we're down 50 feet. But if the line angle is at a 45-degree angle, down 50 feet, 45-degree angle out, we know that we're fishing at 25 feet down. Why is this important? Well, a lot of times your lines will scope way out, and you see this during the middle of the tides when you get two different currents. Sometimes the current at the bottom is running at a different speed than what it is up top. Yes, your speed over ground might only be 2 miles an hour, but if that current at the bottom is sitting still, even with 16, 20 ounces of lead, you'll see your line angle scope way out, it'll blow out, and you're not fishing where those fish are. So you may need to be going into neutral and reverse. So leading up into the rest of the week here tomorrow, it sounds like maybe a bit of a grind. There's a bunch of fish out there in the ocean that hopefully will start pushing in on these bigger tides, but smaller tides, best bite will probably be right in the middle of the incoming or the outgo when there's actually enough current to concentrate these fish and get them active. The slack tide bites will be kind of tough, so we'll probably see another good first light bite, and then a grind until later on in the day, probably 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. But get away from other people. Don't feel like you need to be next to everybody else. Pay attention to your line angle, pay attention to other fishermen, trust your electronics, and make sure that you have your gear in front of those fish. Remember the Pythagorean theorem, remember your geometry, make sure that your gear is at the right part of the water column where you're marking those fish on your graph. So hopefully that's a little bit of help for you. Now it's time to go marry off a couple friends, and I will be back on the water tomorrow and give you guys an update then. We'll see you later.